Back in high school when I started my job as a video editor, I used to always hate saying no to more editing work because most of my time was still spent being a student. There was a lot of time that was spent just scrolling through my phone or just watching YouTube videos because I finished all of my work and I was just waiting to get back home to do my editing work. And that absolutely irked me, having that time lost. So that is exactly when I decided to buy the M1 Pro MacBook Pro. 3 years later, I now script, organize, edit, and do the whole creation process right from this laptop for my own videos. But the more I create, the more my creations evolve, with bigger camera codecs, file sizes, heavier color grading, and even some basic VFX shots. I almost feel a real pain saying this, but I'm starting to see limitations, with one major gripe that I wish I took into account beforehand. But with this laptop now being sold on places like eBay in excellent used and refurbished condition for $750 to $850, is it still one of the best bang for the buck laptops for creators? So I'm going to be talking about my experience with this laptop across the 3 years that I've owned it, and more specifically my use case of it as a creator and video editor. And also be showing how it holds up today with things like battery and editing performance, the real life stuff, and not the benchmarks, because respectfully, those never tell the whole story. Like I said, I went with the M1 Pro. So this is the base model. It's 14 inches, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a 512 gigabyte SSD. These M series laptops brought back MagSafe, which is great. But more importantly, in addition to the USB-Cs, it has HDMI and an SD card reader. Although I will say every so often when I put the SD card in, it doesn't recognize it. So I just have to unplug it and put it back in. Not a big deal to me, but that is something that I have noticed. The things I cared about with, trying to secretly edit videos in the back of a classroom was good battery life while editing, having relatively quiet fans while under heavier workloads, and Final Cut Pro, because that is a Mac-only editing software. And I originally had this 2012 MacBook Pro. I learned video editing on Final Cut, and I haven't turned this on in probably 5 years, so I'm actually gonna plug it in. I still have the charger, and by the end of the video, I'll have a little update to see if it actually still turns on. And finally, this one doesn't really matter, but they're designed really well aesthetically. Plus, I feel like if I had a beefy gaming PC and the fans start ramping up really loud, and everyone just turns and looks at the back of the class and it's just me intently clicking, I would have gotten away with a lot less. I will say though, I was a great student. 3.85 GPA. And I do take care of my tech. This thing really feels and works just as good as when I bought it. The only thing I did notice is the trackpad and keyboard is looking a little worn down. But since I'm always touching it, it makes sense. It's still functionally perfect. And I still love to stare at this absolutely glorious space gray color. Rest in peace, space gray. And I should also mention, I take care of my tech so much that this battery health is at 90% and only 220-ish cycles. Over 3 years, I think that's pretty good. Right now I'm not plugged in, I'm sitting at 100% and I have just set up to start editing a little bit. I'm here on Final Cut. And by the way, my old laptop is plugged in. There's a little red light and I heard a noise when I plugged it in, so I think it might be working. I'll check later. So this video is not done yet. I am still working on it. This is genuinely, I'm in the middle of this edit. And as you can see, overall, when you're zooming out, there's a little bit of clunkiness and it's a little laggy when you're moving it around. This is 4K, 422 10-bit Sony footage. On the majority of this video, there is already a full grade. It's just the B-roll and stuff going on top that's not graded. So there's a lot going on here in terms of color and graphical effects. So now after editing for about 30 minutes, the battery is now down to 80%. That's, 79. 79. So it's not terrible considering that this is the most intensive part of my editing workflow. And to be fair, I have been screen mirroring it to my iPad as well, but I'm not sure how that affects
my battery drain.
Later, I actually decided to run a few other tests. After finishing the video I was working on, I unplugged the laptop from power at 100% and started to render. And just to be clear, additionally, I did have a 1080p monitor plugged in. It took about 13 minutes to fully export, and the battery dropped down to 92%, which seems incredibly good. But in my opinion, the editing playback is much more important than the render times. So to test that, I set the playback to better quality, which froze up everything for a full 45 seconds. But eventually it got back and it played through the whole video without dropping a frame. But what did drop was the battery from 92% to 81%. So it drained more battery playing it back than it did for rendering, which seemed weird to me, so I decided to render it again. This time it took 14 minutes and the battery dropped from 81% to 65%. I will say I heard absolutely no fan noise, and it was warm to the touch but not uncomfortable. The next day I charged it back to 100%, and this time I wanted to monitor the battery rather than stress test it. After scripting a few short form videos, listening to some of my amazing Spotify playlists, starting to edit a short series that I'm working on, then scrolling for a replacement. Yeah, we'll get to that. Of course, I had to watch the new Linus Tech Tips video, and then I got back to editing. I was now at 30% battery after about 3 hours of total use, which was mostly video editing. And there were some noticeable lag and overall performance issues, which I don't think it's battery related, but I do think I'm really pushing this machine to the max, which is drawing a lot of power. With 10% battery left, I wasn't just able to finish the edit, but also render it. So this MacBook lasted about 4 hours, with again, the majority of the work being heavy duty tasks. If you're only doing light tasks, something like web surfing or documents, I've recently gotten 10 to 12 hours out of it. And even if you're just doing some light video editing before all the heavy effects are added, I've gotten around 6 to 7 hours.
And I just want to be clear that I don't think this laptop is slowing down. I think it's more that I'm speeding up. But I absolutely hate this. Not because of the lag itself, but more because this laptop is perfect for the majority of my workflow. Like 85% type of majority. Like the idea of an upgrade sounds expensive, or not expensive, well that too, but excessive. But I'm starting to think it's actually more reasonable. I've actually found sometimes that when I add an effect to Final Cut, it ends up crashing. And I think this is due to RAM or maybe GPU. And I've had some projects where I get towards the end of it and I cannot even do the simplest of edits. It gets so laggy. And to be honest, lagging might be an understatement. It becomes unusable, it's frozen, and I have to force quit to even get it working again.
And just be clear here, when I'm not editing something that's graphically intensive, the laptop actually handles it completely fine. And come to find out, some of these issues actually might be due to the third-party plugins that I was using to have an adjustment layer in the editing software I use, Final Cut Pro. I don't understand how it's called a pro software and doesn't have a built-in adjustment layer, but that's beside the point. What I was using might have been causing some of the problems that I was facing, but there's still plenty of others that was just caused by an overall lack of power.
Like I've had actual nightmares where I'm just at the beach and there's a spinning beach ball of death rolling towards me. I suddenly just wake up in a cold sweat. But you know what would warm me up? A normal Windows laptop, at least in my experience, but this MacBook stays so cool. Even under heavier editing and rendering the entire video out, I almost never hear the fan. All things considered, this is really holding up to editing. I just think for my personal workflow, I'm starting to hit the limits. Now, as far as screen size, this is 14 inches, and with editing, it's not really been a benefit or an issue. It's just exactly 14 inches. It is what it is. Typically, I'm not really traveling and working with this. Most of the time, I'm plugged into my monitor and editing with this as the secondary screen, which I do still use. And I think that extra 2 inches of screen space, if I went with MacBook, getting a 16-inch would be worth the price. And also in the new M4 series of Apple MacBooks, the nano texture seems very enticing. I'm sure this camera can really pick up the glare. In my opinion, I think the $150 for that feature is actually pretty fair, and that's something that I would pay for. And I've already hinted at it, but my overall biggest gripe with this laptop, editing-wise or not, is the SSD. All I was really willing to pay was for the base model, and I guess I just completely overlooked the importance of having at least a terabyte in your laptop internally. Even though Apple objectively overprices their internal SSDs, I think my next machine will probably have 2 to 4 terabytes. I do think 2 is probably the sweet spot for price to value and convenience. And also with the base model, it only comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM. I think for my next machine, I'd be looking more towards 36 to 48, maybe 6 to 4, But again, it's Apple just overpricing it. Like, I might buy a lot of Apple products, but this doesn't mean I agree with their pricing system. Also, a little side rant. Hold on, I'm gonna zoom in for dramatic effect. With the M4 MacBooks, if you want the M4 Max with anything above 36 gigs of RAM, you can't do the lower end M4 Max, you have to get the higher end M4 Max, which is an additional $500. This is the lower end Max chip, and 36 gigs of RAM is the only option you can choose. Well, let's say theoretically I wanted 64. Well, I have to upgrade here. That's plus 300, or so you think, because now you can't get 36 gigs of RAM when you choose that higher end M4 Max chip. So it automatically adds another 200 to your price by upgrading you to 48 gigs. That's how I got the number of 500 more. And then it's 400 for a terabyte. With these external SSDs, this is a Samsung T7. Let's check B&H Photo here. $260 for 4 terabytes. But getting 1 terabyte internally for a MacBook is more than that. But let's just say for a second, I still want the 16-inch, but I just want the M4 Pro. M4 Pro, it's the higher end M4 Pro, because that's all you can get in the 16-inch. Let's say, oh, well, you can't get 36 gigs of RAM. Let's go 48. Oh, if I wanted 64, you also can't get that. But that, in fact, doesn't make sense. Because if we go here to the Mac Mini, here's the M4 Pro Mac Mini. Oh, 64 gigs of RAM. So that just leads me to believe that that's Apple just making it inaccessible for laptops. But again, I don't really know how that works. I work out of my living room, not Silicon Valley. What about the camera that I now use, which is a Sony FX3? I wanted something that was more powerful than I needed for now, so I can grow into it, and something that's reliable and I can keep around for a very long time. And as far as laptops that do that the best, I would say those are MacBooks. Plus, I don't even know what the closest Windows alternative would be. I guess maybe like a Razer Blade or one of those new Dell XPSs. I mean, it'll never be a apples to apples comparison. I'm actually so sorry. I can't even imagine. So many tech YouTubers have probably made that joke before. But things like the minimalistic design, build quality, speaker sound, and just the other little things, like also being able to refer to my laptop as a MacBook and never refer to it as a laptop again, so people know that I am the real deal. There's just some reasons that I'll probably continue to buy Apple computers. They are seriously built to last, which includes this one from 2012. Let's see if it boots up. I haven't tried it yet. I just had it charging while I was recording this video. Do you see that? It looks like I probably let my brother use it and he made an account for it. But that's actually, I might have to dig a little deeper into this. I doubt it can still edit videos, but maybe I can try. And honestly, if I wasn't being limited by the M1 Pro, I would have absolutely no reason to upgrade.
So yes, this laptop has served me incredibly well, and I've had so many great memories creating the videos I have on it, from client work to starting my own channel now. But now it's hitting the point where I can genuinely say that it is limiting me, and although it's not the most urgent thing, I am now in the market for a new machine. The M1 Pro is still an incredibly capable laptop, and I think it'll continue to be for many years to come.